our discourse, improve our worldview, improve our own sense of personal and professional development. We as educators decided to pick this book this month, Tattoos on the Heart by Father Gregory Boyle. It's about the largest gang rehabilitation and reentry program in the world based out of LA. It's an inspirational story about economic and personal development. And as educators, I think it's core to our belief that we see the best in each other and in ourselves, and that we create opportunity for others. And that's what Father Gregory Boyle has done in this book, which I'm very excited to talk about with my panelists, both this week for part 1 and next week, same time, Wednesday evening, 8:30 Eastern, 5:30 Pacific. So let's go on ahead and introduce this incredible panel. We'll go clockwise. So Rajiv, I'm gonna pass it to you first. Who are you? Why are you here? What called you to this book?
Right on. Hey, everybody. I'm Rajiv. I'm a co-founder of 99 Pages. I do work at LinkedIn for my day job, but just recently, especially in this past year, I've been getting really interested in the issue of mass incarceration. And I think that this book is just a really honest example of what right could look like in terms of some of the solutions to help reduce our prison population, improve the lives of young people coming up in either minority communities, poor communities, and folks that just need a little bit more resources to get themselves on the right foot. So I think Father Boyle is doing tremendous work. I'm a huge fan, love the book, and just grateful to be a part of the panel. Thanks, Jackie.
We are lucky to have you. And in fact, I do want to share the inspiration. You planted a seed early on that's like, hey, December, holidays, religious celebrations, like maybe we should think about a spiritual book. And this is like an incredible, here you have a religious Jesuit priest who is also actively educating and creating opportunities. So I thought it was just such a great fit. So thanks for the inspiration. Next up, if you're lucky, you tuned in 2 weeks ago to meet him for our one-on-one interview. We have David Fakunle. David, who are you? Why are you here? What calls you?
I'm here because I decided to read a book for the first time in a good while. For fun, not because it's my job. So I'm David Fakunle, Dr. David Fakunle, I see it there. I am a mercenary for change. And the reason I call myself a mercenary is because I operate in multiple spaces. I do like to get paid and compensated for what I do, but it's about operating in multiple spaces because the issues of our society and in our world are multi-dynamic, and therefore they require a multi-dynamic solution, and I aim to be part of that multi-dynamic solution. So whether it is as a faculty, whether at Johns Hopkins or the University of Florida, whether it's as an artist with Woundward Productions or Discover Me, Recover Me, whether it's in government with the Maryland Lynching Truth and Reconciliation Commission, I am about the elevation of truth, and I'm about the elevation of healing. So thank you for having me, Jackie.
Dang. I think we all need as tight a motto, a life mission statement as that. So
I'm used to it at this point, you know what I mean?
Rudy, I am so glad to have you on this panel. He joined last month as a panelist as we discussed Elena Aguilar's book on coaching. He is a partner at FourPoint Education Partners. Actually, I just want to shout you out, Rudy, but same as everybody else, who are you? What brings you? What calls you today?
Thanks so much, Jackie. It's a pleasure to be back and a pleasure to read this book and discuss it this evening with everybody who's on the chat. As somebody who grew up in the inner city of Milwaukee, was a first-generation college student and identifies as a Chicano and also as a Christian, this book resonated on multiple levels. I've seen the power of faith in education and action, and we know that faith without works is dead, so really love digging in on this book and looking forward to discussing it with everyone tonight.
Incredible. Thank you so much. All right. Really good. Also want to shout out our most amazing educator, commentator, the one and only Judy Bello, who says she is so excited for the discussions about this book. Just a reminder, but there is a live chat here. You can ask questions, you can comment. We want to know what's top of mind for you. Judy has already shared some of the quotes that we'll go ahead and discuss as well. But let me hide that. And because this is the Educator Book Club, I'm actually just going to go ahead and start on page 2, where Father Boyle brings up what we now call very commonly the school to prison pipeline. So he talks about at the bottom of the page, at the time, there were so many gang involved middle school students who'd been given the boot from their schools that their constant presence in the projects during school hours brought violence and major drug dealing. So One problem about it starts with getting sent to the office. I mean, research shows that Black kids as early as preschool are sent to the office like 4x the amount of white students, which is alarming. It starts with the number of suspensions, and here we get to actual expulsions. I want to continue on to page 3. When he took over, Father Boyle, as head of the parish, he helped create an alternative school. And he writes, with the school came a new parish attitude. Suddenly, the welcome mat was tentatively placed out front. A new sense of church had emerged, open and inclusive, replacing the hermetically sealed model that had kept the good folks in and the bad folks out. Now, he talks about church only being for the good folks, but school, I feel like often today has been, these bad kids, this label. And I just want to share, I shared with the panelists briefly before this. When I was a first-year teacher, another teacher said, let me look at your roster. You know, before even my first day, I want to tell you who the good kids and the bad kids are. And I remember she pointed out one specific student, we'll call him D. She's like, oh, he's a bad kid. He's a lieutenant in the Crips. He threw a chair at a teacher last year. Like, he's going to be bad news. And I was just like, let me form my own opinions, right? Like, I believe students walk in, anything is possible. I hate a culture of like broken expectations. It sounds racist to me. Actually, Rudy, that's something we were talking about. So I'm just going to pass it off to you. You are someone who has worked in Baltimore City public schools, Milwaukee public schools. What do you think is some of the problem here?
Thanks, Jackie. I appreciate that. And I definitely saw that in the first half of the book. And like you said, resonated with my own experiences. My first district office position in Milwaukee, after working in the classroom as a teacher for 8 years, was actually supporting students who were at risk for not graduating high school. And that was after working at the school level with a program for students that was called the Opportunity Center. And that was for students who basically had failed the 9th grade. Many of those students I'm still in touch with today. I see each individual and their potential, regardless of their past, through what I've seen in my own family over generations. There's a lot of opportunity, for redemption. And what I saw in the neighborhood school where I worked as a teacher, and then later as I supported the whole district with that work, was that oftentimes over time, even though teachers came in with good intentions, if they didn't have that similar kind of cultural background as the students that they were serving, sometimes little by little what seeped in was what we call the soft racism of low expectations. And they started to have those low expectations for students and not guide them into the bright futures that the students could have. And so I think that's something that we have to guard against. And again, like I said, something that I saw quite a bit in reading that first half of the book, where folks were coming out to see what Father Boyle was doing, and basically having these expectations, literally coming out there in a flak jacket and saying after an hour or so, I was expecting monsters. These are just people that I just are seeing. They just wanted a job. They just wanted to get to work. They wanted to be productive. And I felt like that resonated even with what I have seen in the schools.
Thank you so much. David, I'm going to pass this off to you. Where have you seen the soft racism of low expectations, as Rudy called it, in your work?
Ooh, man. I see it all over the place, especially with a lot of the artistic work that I do, either as a storyteller or particularly with Bloomberg Productions. We have a lot of kids that we work with, particularly in Baltimore City Public Schools. We're a Baltimore-based performing arts company. And I think much of the heavy lifting that we do is breaking the kids out of this low expectations for themselves. And they're only setting those expectations for themselves because that's all they hear. So one thing that I call back to is what my mother always said: children learn what they live. I'm an example of what I lived in my house, and I can understand that what we see a lot of times in society, in the public schools, whether it's Baltimore, Milwaukee, LA, you pick a spot, are the environments in which people live. Now, I think where we go wrong, particularly with educators, and I understand, because your job is, if 2020 hasn't taught us how important educators are, I don't know what will. I think a lot of times for their own mental health, and correct me if I'm wrong, I feel like it's easier to blame the kids than to blame the system and the circumstances that lead to those expectations that we easily assign to kids. You know what I mean? It's easy to say, oh, Dante or Michelle or whatever, that's on them. They can't strive for anything, as to say, let's think about where they live. Let's think about the socioeconomic composition of where they live. Let's think about all the examples of racism and classism and sexism that they experience on a daily basis, how much trauma they're experiencing before they even come out the door. why would they want to learn anything? There's too much on their mind already. Learning is the last thing that they want to do. So to me, it's again, it's multi-dynamic, it's multi-systemic. And I think one of the easy, most kind of visceral ramifications of that are kids that themselves don't expect much of themselves. And then that's just perpetuated, and I think further conditioned a lot of times, unfortunately, by educators.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing. Rajiv, I do want to pass this off to you too. You're from the South. You've gotten great education at places like West Point and Wharton and Columbia. Oh my gosh. But I'm just curious, like, you know, in Roanoke, we could start there. Like, did you see different people treated differently? Did you ever see people getting kicked out? I mean, I think of West Point as like very tough on discipline. So, you know, the like, hey, second chances. Like, I don't know how that would jibe with your like military education.
I mean, I think that's really interesting. You know, I gotta say, I think that, you know, the thing about low expectations, I think from the get-go in a community, when you're at a place like West Point, or when you're a place like one of these elite institutions, like if we're going to start off with the presupposition that, you know, some of these communities have low expectations for the students in these poor communities, well then, I mean, honestly, the education where I was able to go to at West Point and Columbia and Wharton was the exact opposite problem, in the sense that like the expectations were super high. Like, you got here, what are you going to do with it? There was a level of intensity. It wasn't like this cakewalk. I would certainly not describe it as a level of entitlement where, oh, I'm here, great, I'm done, I get to go, you know, live a prestigious life. No, it is the exact opposite. And I think it's that ethos of like, you know, here is your privilege, here's your responsibility, here's your gift. What are you going to make of it? And that level of intensity wasn't just given to us by the professors. It was actually a part of the peer group, I would say. And I think in many ways, when I chose to attend West Point, what I was really attending and what I was like trying to get into was a culture, right? And so the idea of second chances, this is something that I think is really interesting, because people assume that at these like higher elite education that like, you know, if you fail like at West Point, for example, if you fail, you're done, you're out. Exact opposite. In fact, I think the biggest lesson that I took away from my education was a comfort with failure. I'm not scared of failure. I fail all the time. I think what I really took away from my education and the privilege that I had to go to these great institutions was the idea that I can mess up, I can fail, but as long as I keep getting back up, like I will make it happen. And I have to ask for help. I have to be resourceful and get support from my faculty, my friends, my colleagues, etc., to achieve whatever I need to achieve on that given day. And so I think you know, expectations that are imposed on us, whether they're super high, super low, you know, they're you know, they can be toxic in either direction. I think what's really important is to, and I think Father Boyle does this in many ways with Homeboy Industries and this book that we're learning, is he gives these kids a sense of resourcefulness that like, hey, you have the tools at your disposal to actually transcend whatever expectations that people have of you and for you. Whether you think they're too high, too low, whatever, you know, it gives you like an internal locus of control. And I think that's ultimately like, I think the most important thing I took away from my educational experiences.
Wow, amazing. There's a lot to unpack there. First, I love that you brought up this concept of second chances. I mean, as you, Homeboy Industry is often called this place of second chances. I also just want to paint a contrast where you at West Point were told, here is your gift, here is your privilege. And I want to, again, as an English teacher, I love bringing it back to the text, but on page 9 and 10, it tells a story of an individual named David, and he's feeling down now and he's beating himself up. He struggled with homelessness and addiction. And Father Boyle says, look, David, you know, you got to crawl before you can walk, and then walk before you can run, you know, trying to chunk it for him. And David's eyes soften with tears, quote, yeah, but I know I can fly. I just need to catch a gust of wind. I was so moved. I'm almost like getting goosebumps reading it again, because so many people aren't given that gust of wind. And so I actually think this is a great place to move to talk about opportunity, right? Because this whole book is about economic opportunity, creating opportunity for others where there is none, the importance of jobs and creating jobs. And And so I know we all have a lot to say about this, actually. But Rajiv, I know you just talked, but since you come from a LinkedIn background, you work for a company that is trying to create jobs, helping people find jobs. I'm just curious if you want to kind of start us off on this topic.
Yeah, I think, my big takeaway from the book is the importance of gainful employment and what that can mean to a person's soul and self-esteem. I think that if I see, and I deal with this all the time, right? I see a lot of charities out there, and it's easy to think of it like, all right, we're going to give food to the poor, we're going to give housing, we're going to give some training, we're just going to start handing out these, basic needs that we think people are lacking in, and we'll just solve the problem. We'll just give it to them. And I think what Father Boyle does is he taps into this like secondary and tertiary layer of our identities. And when he looks at these young kids, he doesn't see just like bad kids creating crimes. What he sees are entrepreneurs. What he sees are resourceful, hungry, ambitious kids that honestly want to improve their station in life, but without a ton of opportunity directly present in front of them. The only way to do that is maybe through illicit businesses like drugs, for example, drug trade. And I think what he does is he senses that resourcefulness, he senses that void of opportunity, and he creates a legitimate platform for economic opportunity for these kids, so that they can feel like not only are they gainfully employed, they're contributing to society, they're improving their station in life, but they're doing so in a fashion that they can be role models to the generation coming behind them. And I think that's a really important thing for all of us to take away. Like, just because a charity is giving away the first layer surface need doesn't mean it's actually solving the problem. I think what Father Boyle does is he's getting into that psychological void that needs to be solved. And I think that's for any of us participating in charitable giving or volunteer work, I think these are the kinds of things that we need to think about, is like, hey, am I just working for the food? Am I literally just going to the homeless shelter and giving, food, giving water, giving clothing, etc.? Or is there a way that I can actually impact that secondary, tertiary levels of consciousness so that these people can truly become the best versions of themselves? So that's what I take away from Father Boyle. But I'd love to hear what the rest of the panel thinks. I mean, maybe I'm missing something,
Yeah, David, I'm going to pop this over to you next. I mean, what do you think?
The most important thing that Father Boyle does in this book is acknowledge the people that he works with. It's not about the opportunity. They needed to be seen. They needed to be appreciated. They needed to be respected. And that's what he did. What's the thing that brought them to tears more than anything else? The fact that he acknowledged them. It resonates strongly with me, because that's exactly what I do with the work of Discover Me, Recover Me. Through storytelling, I help to acknowledge the humanity of other people. And it doesn't take much, but you see how profound it is. We're talking about gangbangers, some of the most hardened individuals you can find, people who have done time in prison. And we know what prisons in the United States will do to you. They'll make you even harder, even less humane, unfortunately. And all he had to do was acknowledge them, to say, I see you. I see you as the good person that you've always been. And it brought them to tears. It's that simple. And then he takes it another step further and say, not only do I see who you are, but I'm going to help you further manifest what you're capable of doing. So we recognize, and I'm a big fan of Gangland. I wish it would come back. I know there's plenty more gangs they could do episodes on. So, A&E, if you watch this, bring back Gangland. It was always a similar story that I was able to really capture from any of the episodes. And usually when it got to the point where people were starting to leave the gang and saying, you know what, I don't want to do this anymore, they wanted something else for themselves. They came to that realization. A lot of times it had to do with getting married, or especially having kids. It's like, this is not the life that I want for them, and it's not the life that I want for myself. So what Father Boyle did was, I'm going to give you an out. I'm going to give you a legitimate outlet by which you can take this new path in your life. A path where you now realize who you are, and you can manifest it in this productive way. And see how many of them ran with it. They were craving it. They were desiring it, but so many of them didn't even think they were worthy. Opportunity. They didn't think they were worthy. So we talk about second chances. I mean, we all need second chances. I mean, have I ever gone to prison? No. Have I ever been in a gang? No. But I've done things that I regret. That's not going to change anytime soon. As long as I live on this planet, I'm going to do things that I regret. I'm always in need of second, third, 45th chances. I'm always in need of forgiveness. I'm always in need of healing. I'm always in need of growth. That's life. So to me, this is just a very visceral example of the chances that we all need. You know, what do they say? He who is without sin cast the first stone. I don't see anybody throwing stones right now.
Wow, amazing. So, you know, it's like, this is a book about jobs. No. David reorients us. This is about acknowledgement and being seen. Again, English teacher, I just want to pull in a quote, and then Rudy, I'll pull you in. Page 47, Father Boyle just remembers a kid's name. It was Lula, right? And he sees him in the community. He calls out, "Hey, Lula." And the quote is, "You would have thought I'd electrocuted him. His whole body spasms with delight to be known, to be called, to hear his name uttered out loud." There was also, I couldn't find the quote, but he asked someone, like, what's the advice for teaching? It's just like, learn everyone's name by the first day, right? Like, people desire to be known. So I just love that you called that out, David, especially as it relates to so much of a theme in the book is shame, which he defines as, you know, the absence of self-love, similar to Brene Brown, who some of us might have read or heard about, the contrast between guilt, where you feel bad about your actions, versus shame, which is when you feel bad about yourself. But I feel selfish for hogging the immediate reaction. So Rudy, please let me let you jump in here. Is this about opportunity? Is this about acknowledgement? Is this about all the above?
Definitely all of the above. I think a couple pieces I would add to it. One of the phrases that David used, you mentioned a legitimate path for the young men in this book. And I think it means legitimate not only in terms of being a legal option, a legal set of options, but also legitimate in the sense of that the fact that it was realistic for them, it was tangible, they could see it. One of the things that we've seen in work that you've done and others that are doing good work in Baltimore is that, you know, part of the reason why young people sometimes are, let's say, skipping school and, you know, out there with the squeegee trying to make a little money, you know, wiping windows, is because they can see that that's a concrete way to make money. If you have somebody come in as a guest speaker and say, you know, hey, you can be an IT professional, you can be, you know, whatever you want to be in the future, if they don't have somebody in their, you know, in their circle, in their neighborhood that's actually doing those things, it doesn't seem realistic to them. It's not something that they can really accept and process. And so that's one of the benefits of the fact that he's got these concrete, you know, opportunities for them in place that they can see themselves doing it and follow that path. So I think that's pretty powerful. And I think another piece that connected for me was just with some of the prior conversation, the idea that human brilliance and potential is equitably distributed around the world, but opportunity is not. And so again, I think for those of us who have privilege in different ways, and, you know, really so cool that we've got, you know, a LinkedIn pro here with us. That's our responsibility, is to provide those connections to help, you know, help share that social capital that we have with others, you know, and not just like Jessica mentioned in the chat, giving a man a fish, but teaching him how to fish.
Incredible.
Here, Jackie, may I contribute something, if that's all right?
Please jump in.
So I'm not sure if anybody's actually looked at the 990, which is like Homeboy Industries, like their IRS contributions. Like, it was one of the first things just in my head that I like had to figure out. Like, he's making all these great changes, but like, how much does this cost, if you will? Like, I mean, it's just incredible, right? Like, just in terms of like contributions and donations, it's roughly in the neighborhood of like $15 million a year. And this is after the book has come out and a lot of publicity. But when you think about like $15 million a year, like, and the value he's creating, the number of kids he's keeping out of jails, out of trouble, like, this is pennies. Like, I think that's something that really deserves some acknowledgement. Like, whether someone feels seen, whether they're getting a job, whatever they're getting out of it, like, if the result is a healthier, well-adjusted member of society, and we're doing it for pennies on the dollar compared to what it would cost to get them into the like this channel of law enforcement and corrections, like, it is just so much better of a way and cleaner of a way to invest our taxpayer dollars. Like, it is just mind-blowingly efficient. So it's just another thing that kind of, like, when I think about how much positivity is coming out of it, it's also like, it's just the degree of return on investment to me as a taxpayer is very relevant. And I think that that's something that we should all think about.
And I think one of the problems, really quickly, I'm sorry, one of the problems a lot of nonprofits or even for-profits that do this type of work run into is how do you quantify that return on investment? So for every Homeboy Industries, I can think about a Woundward Productions, for example. This is an active issue that we deal with all the time. We know what we do work. We know that the implementation of performing arts, we know the implementation of the Virtues Project, which focuses on these positive aspects of humanity, have, for lack of a better word, saved a lot of kids. But how do we quantify that? We're not following them for 10, 15, 20 years doing a longitudinal study. Yeah, I could, I'm a researcher, but I don't want to. It's more important to just do the work. And I think a lot of organizations fall into not even that trap. I think just focus on that. We're going to do the work and don't necessarily think about the evaluation or think about the return on investment. So one of the things that I think behooves researchers, so I'll call myself out, is how can we empower organizations like Homeboy Industries, like a Woundward Productions, to find meaningful and relevant metrics that capture the essence and the impact of what they do for communities. Because if I could roll down to, City Hall, talk to Brandon Scott with his cool afro, hey, look, bruh, you need to give me X amount of money from Woundward Productions because here are all the stories that I'm gonna present to you. How much time do you have to show that this works? We need a reevaluation of what we consider data. So now I'm gonna sound like a researcher right now because I have a huge gripe on data. What we consider data and what we consider important data. That's the problem that we're running into. So that whole idea of return on investment, I think that's the first place we need to start with a lot of organizations that are doing this type of incredible work.
Incredible. I'm going to introduce one of our newest panelists, but first I gotta piggyback on what was just said, and I'm going to spotlight myself. Check it out. Again, English teacher, always want to bring it back to the text. This is from the second half of the book, so don't worry if you haven't read it, but it's a relevant quote. It's from page 179. Funders sometimes say, quote, "We don't fund efforts, we fund outcomes." We all hear this and think how sensible, practical, realistic, hard-nosed, and clear-eyed it is. But maybe Jesus doesn't know why we're nodding so vigorously. Without wanting to, we sometimes allow our preference for the poor to morph into a preference for the well-behaved and the most likely to succeed, even if you get better outcomes when you work with those folks. If success is our engine, we sidestep the difficult and belligerent and eventually abandon the slow work of God. I want to shout out my mom, Judy Bello, who's the one who, when reading this, texted me and was like, "Oh my God, I love this quote," because she knows I've done a lot of fundraising. So I just want to shout out Rajiv for caring about ROI because the work he's done has great and clear ROI, but also the perils of trying to look for quick and easy returns on work that is long and hard and slow. We're going to pause there. We have another doctor in our ranks, so maybe she can also riff on research and impact measurement. Dr. Natalie Mejia, I'm going to spotlight you, and I want you to just introduce yourself, tell us who you are, what motivates you, and what brought you to this book. Why did you say yes? What draws you to it? Oh, and you're muted. That's my bad. One sec, and you're back. Hello. Great. Killing it.
Take two. Good evening, everyone. My name is Dr. Natalie Mejia. This is my first time participating in something like this, so thank you for creating the space and for inviting me. I am currently an assistant principal of a charter school in Los Angeles, I'm in my 10th year of education, and I recently graduated from USC School of Rossier this past June with my doctorate in educational leadership. In particular, I focused my study on looking at leadership for Latinas, leading charter schools, and what are some, just access to resources, and then also what are some barriers that they're experiencing on their pathway to leadership positions within educational schools. And I chose I chose to join Tattoos on the Heart for a number of different reasons. One of them, just a little bit about my background and how I grew up. I have a brother who was in and out of gangs, in and out of the system himself, was incarcerated by the time he was in 9th grade, and is currently still, dealing with a lot of those ramifications and those decisions. And so this has definitely impacted my life in a very personal way, so much so that I actually did research as an undergrad in UCLA. I worked with Youth Build, Boys and Girls Club, and other services to look at kids on the gridiron and really looking at our most vulnerable populations and how we can support them. And then when I got to Baltimore through Teach for America, decided to volunteer and teach at the state prisons, where I taught college level math courses to people at Jesuit. And so it's again like something that I wear. It's a part of who I am and my background, and it's something that I think about often. In particular, as you were just sharing around, like, I think oftentimes policy and things become who deserves it, a matter of who deserves it and who doesn't. And I think if we don't move to a more compassion space, I definitely think that we're going to see a lot of policies continuing to dehumanize people in the process. And that's why I'm here, is really to advocate that we need to shift away from the metrics and the rules and really look at our hearts and see how we can better serve all of our people, because we're all here in community together.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us. And she came straight from work in a coaching conversation. There's been some great, thank you to an amazingly active live chat. I want to quote Jessica Quindle here: education, not incarceration. The financial benefits have been quantified, and yet policymakers continue to prioritize spending on incarceration versus preventative, proactive college and career programming. Also just pulling from the book, page 9, in talking about his mission, he says, for more than 20 years, we have asked the city, what if we were to invest in gang members rather than just seek to incarcerate our way out of this problem? So, Jessica, thank you for bringing it to a policy lens. Rudy, I'm going to throw this to you. Like, we know it can be better. Why is it so hard to reform the criminal justice system? I know it's a big question, but take it wherever you want.
Yeah, I appreciate it. And a lot of times I think, well-intentioned folks, including us at times, will think, we need to fix the system. And so a quote came to my mind with this, which is that every system is perfectly designed to get the results it gets. So I think it was not a mistake that things have been designed this way, over decades and over the past really, century. And so I think we need to really follow the money and see who actually is literally profiting from this system and actively work to dismantle it.
Amazing. Thank you so much. I'm always so slow with this. Rajiv, I know on Sunday you did an interview with the leader of a group that you admire. I'm curious if you could tell us about your work with families against mandatory minimums.
Yeah, absolutely. And they do a lot more than actually just fight mandatory minimum policies. They, compassionate release programs, particularly in a time of COVID. They do great. It's fam.org if you get a chance. But yeah, we interviewed Kevin Ring, the CEO, and I've gotten pretty excited about this organization. And one thing I've figured out is it's more than just Rudy, you're absolutely right. We've got to follow the money. Like, prison industrial complex is absolutely something that we need to take a look at in this country. But what's interesting is that I think we also need to kind of examine a little bit of our own identities as voters and some of the assumptions we have about punishment. And I think, punishment plays a really interesting role in our psychology from a very early age, right? You do bad, if you do something that your parents don't want you to, they punish you, right? Every family operates that way, and there's consequences for disobeying the rules. But that same philosophy doesn't scale well into society, right? You cannot, correct someone purely with punitive measures. And I think that's a disconnect that we as a voter base have to reconcile, right? And I think we have been fed a diet of tough on crime type rhetoric for the better part of 30 years now. And I think because of that rhetoric and a botched war on drugs, mandatory minimums where we actually take decision making out of the hands of judges because a politician says, hey, I'm tough on crime, I'm fighting for this mandatory minimum to send a signal of how seriously we take this, breaking the law. I think we've been fed this diet, and I think of what punishment really means in our society. And so in addition to absolutely following the money, understanding hey, who's got an incentive to keep these prisons filled, right? Who is actually profiting off of this, and who's recontributing that money back into political campaign distributions? At the end of the day, the best part of a democracy is every one of these people, they work for us, right? We get to choose what matters in a given election. And if we can actually swallow this this pain and suffering, if we can have some degree of empathy for how many people are in prison serving extremely long sentences for very simple crimes that were nonviolent, did not have anything to really do to risk life or limb. And if we can really understand that, you know, a punitive measure isn't actually doing them any good, and it's not doing us any good, right, as a society collectively. And so in addition to learning about, you know, the incentives, the financial incentives that a lot of our lawmakers have, I think like a big part of this collective body of people who care, whether it's FAM, whether it's the Equal Justice Initiative, the NAACP, all these charities that are kind of working in the space, I think at the end of the day, in my opinion, the most important thing that we as a society need to do is like redefine what punitive measures mean. Like, what is the role of prison in a society? And so that's kind of something that I'm really fired up about.
Incredible. And I love feeling your passion and fire. I have to read an amazing quote, shout out at the bottom, from Jessica Quindle. Love Rajiv's perspective about punishment. The word discipline actually means to teach and comes from the idea of disciples. And yet we confuse consequences and punishment. So really great. Thank you for shouting that out. David, I want to talk to you, pull it up to you. What is the purpose of prison and how can we reform our criminal justice system?
First, let me say this. The war on drugs is a war on Black, brown, and the poor. So I'm going to just get that out the way. And that started with Nixon in the 60s. So we've been dealing with it for almost 60 years. You know, look up Iran-Contra, look up the documentary, The Real Rick Ross. It'll tell you a lot that you want to know about how deep this is run. Like you said, we have to reevaluate what the point of criminal justice is. Is it really justice? And who is it serving? So like Rudy said, the system works perfectly for who? Don't work for me. I must say it don't work for most of us, you know, in this chat. I'm assuming none of us are rich, so then it probably don't work for any of us. You know what I mean? It serves a select few. One thing that continues to just boggle my mind with especially everything that I've observed this year is how is it so easy for us to disregard the humanity of other people? You know what I mean? Especially when I look at our elected officials. You are elected to that position to represent your people, and yet you disregard them so easily. How does that happen? And I think, why does it happen so just kind of nonchalantly? It truly blows my mind. I think the only reason I would want to get into politics is as an experiment to myself. Would I get as corrupted as so many of the politicians and lawmakers that I see? I would just want to know. And then if I do, then I'm gonna tell you, okay, don't get into politics. It's just corruptible. It's easy. It's mad easy to be corrupted in politics. But criminal justice is just that. So we want to get down to it again. Let's look at the prison industrial complex. Let's look at all these companies that are making billions of dollars every year, that are taking a snippet of that money, that are putting it back in the pockets of lawmakers to make sure the laws do not change. That's why things are maintained the way that they are. But if I take hope from anything this year, is that I think more people have been activated, have been empowered to know that their voice does matter. Their vote does matter. Certain institutions will do everything in their power to take that vote away from you. And you know what? In a lot of cases this year, it didn't work. They tried. It didn't work. So to me, we have to run with that. We have to be the staunchest supporters and defenders of this democracy, to say that we must work in a system that works for everyone. And to show that this system can work for everyone. The reality is we've never seen that before. So much of what we're looking for is, for all intents and purposes, a dream. It's hypothetical, it's theoretical. We haven't done it yet, but we have enough examples to show that, yes, it is possible. How does that look in the United States of America? So I think for me, criminal justice is just a big chunk of the manifestation of just greed and, again, disregard of humanity. And the one thing I appreciate about Father Boyle is, again, he brought it back to acknowledgement. every conversation that we have about reform in this country needs to start with the acknowledgement of the humanity that are people who are served by these various systems. We're going to talk about education. Okay, let's recognize the humanity of Black, Brown, Indigenous, Latinx, on and on and on and on and on. Same with the criminal justice system. We're going to talk about economic reform. Same thing. We have to acknowledge the people that have been reduced and marginalized to such significant levels that it's almost at like critical levels of depravity that we now have to undo and try to reform. That's where it starts. Tell me I exist. Tell me that I'm real. Tell me that I'm human. Say it. Don't think it. Don't do it while you're brushing your teeth. Say it to my face. Tell me that I'm real. Tell me that I'm a human and I deserve all the things that you do. And then we can get to work.
Amazing.
Actually, Jackie, can I ask a question?
Please go for it.
Yeah, actually, my question is for Natalie, because you mentioned your brother, someone very close to you was going through a lot of, fighting the system since 9th grade, I think you said, very young and early in life. I'm just curious, did you ever have a positive interaction with a policymaker, lawmaker, where you felt them feel empathy? And if so, how did you get that level of empathy commitment from them? I'm just curious if you had any success.
I think we all know the answer to that, right? It being no. And I think that's really what encouraged me and inspired me to go into education, right? Is I always felt that if my brother and people or other youth around his age really had a mentor, a role model, or someone to turn to and learn how to navigate, especially because our parents came from another country, and figuring out how do we navigate this society, and how do we figure out what does it mean to be a man of color? What does it mean to be the child of an immigrant in America? And how do we move up in society in a way that allows us to to be who we are and remain authentic to our culture? I think that we would have found ourselves in a different situation. And I would say the most contact that we had, we didn't really have contact with policymakers or anything like that. It was more so social work. And I think even in that, social workers, more often it was more so of how do we get the kids out of the household, as opposed to how do we restore and keep the family together? Because at the end of the day, we are family, and that's my brother, right? I stand with him and by him through the thick and the thin. And I think that had there been a focus on how to preserve the family and how to help the family, our family unit stay together, I think we would have seen very different life outcomes. Unfortunately, that was not the case. So much so that I didn't really get to experience growing up with my brother, because he was in and out from 9th grade even until he was about 19 years of age. And so a lot of my memories with him are in the juvenile halls and the placement camps, where my family and I would get together on Sundays with him and just check in with him. And I think, again, there's a lot to be said around how we criminalize kids. And he was just a child. He was a 9th grader, criminalize kids and the decisions that sometimes we know aren't the best ones made, but again, there's more to it. And so, yeah, the short of answer that is no, and just really having experience with social workers in a way that I love social workers and advocate, but I definitely think that there needs to be more of an asset-based approach and thinking about how we keep families together rather than splitting them apart.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Rajiv, I want to put it back on you. I know from a young age, we've been friends since childhood. You were interested in politics with a very you went to West Point, you want to serve. I know that's where it comes from. So I'm just curious what you think about all this, what your lens and theory of change is now.
I think David actually, as he was talking and by the way, if it's not too late to draft David, to run for something, man, sign me up.
Yeah. You know what? Because everybody asked me this, I'm gonna just put it out there now. This year has taught me the importance of one virtue above all, and that's patience.
Yeah.
So it's not that I'm not into it. It's not that I wouldn't consider it, but I'm biding my time. I'm just gonna say that I'm gonna bide my time. When the time comes, all these people that say, "Yo, you need to run for office," okay, y'all gonna be knocking on doors and putting out flyers and stuff on me. So I'm gonna keep that in mind. And we on camera. So
great.
Sign me up. Yeah, my life is in many ways the American dream, and I am so proud of my father and so grateful that I was born in India, but I was able to come to this country, get a good education, serve in the military, and make something of myself, and I'm really grateful for that. And yeah, I think I always wanted to kind of serve and go back into public service at some point. But I think what, we've acknowledged in this conversation in no uncertain terms is that, the competing interests that an elected official in this country has, tugging them in different directions, it is so strong that it is easy to lose yourself and lose the principles with which, that the principles that brought you to want to serve in the first place, because, you have to raise money to, go out and actually campaign. And then you're in this perpetual state of asking for money, campaigning, asking for money, campaigning. Each vote that you make is so highly scrutinized by, the fringes of our country that can paint you in whatever light they decide to. And there's no pleasing everyone. And I think that part of the reason I've become very averse to elected office, and to be honest, is, I'm going to put it like this: like, I think we get the leaders we deserve, and I don't think we as a country are doing a good job listening to all sides and to actually pay attention to the pain and suffering that's out there. I think this issue is a quintessential example. There is clearly, when I hear Natalie telling me these stories of, like, they had to go on Sundays to go visit her brother in, like, a detention center, I'm like, my heart breaks, right? Like, that just really crushes me. I'm an older brother, and if I have to let my sister see me in that situation, I'm not only is that hard for the family, but that's hard for him too. He doesn't want to, he wants to be your role model, and my heart just breaks when I think of that. And yet I just feel like, I don't know. It's hard, Jackie. I gotta admit, because, like, I think I got a lot of passion. I got a lot of anger. I got a lot of fervor, and I'm just not sure if political office, elected offices, like, I'm not sure if that's the best vehicle for some folks like me to make change anymore. I gotta admit, it's a little demoralizing. It's something I'm struggling with. And if it makes you feel any better, I am, like I mentioned, I'm reading Obama's A Promised Land right now, like a third of the way done, and it's firing me up. I'm so glad that there's some patient, charismatic people out there who can make change and still get everybody under a bigger tent. But yeah, that is getting harder and harder with every generation that comes by, I think.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Rudy, I want to pass this to you. You've worked in government, right? From the school district leadership realm. You've moved to the private practice now. You are also pursuing your PhD and working on entrepreneurial ideas. I'm just curious. I just want to give you a space to react to everything that's been said recently.
Yeah, I think there is a space, for each of these. One thing that comes to mind, I'm not sure if I mentioned this on a previous conversation, but I think one of our mutual collaborators from Baltimore, and also I think shares that West Point experience with you as well, Rajiv, is the author Westmore, author of Westmore, and now in his current role, heading up the Robin Hood Foundation in New York City, one of the biggest philanthropies out there. He points out that no amount of philanthropy can overcome bad policy, and so I think that that's something that we have to keep in mind, is that there is a lot of opportunity, a lot of flexibility, and the private sector can be more nimble, but on the other hand, just like we were talking about as far as the criminal justice system and everything else, we also need good policy. So I think there's a role for everybody to play, and I think it's not an either or, it's kind of a both and, looking at those different aspects of the system and how we each can play a part.
There's a great happening in the chat. I want to say one big mission of this work is to bring rival gang members side by side. So there's a lot about community and connection. And so just to read from the chat, Mahi Gunturu, I don't know if I'm saying it right, said, what would need to happen for any community to look beyond and be in action to empower their and other communities? And Rudy, I think you jumped in that this is about connection. And then Judy Bella jumps in and says, you cannot demonize anyone you come to know. I'm curious, with this group, we all work at different lenses. How do we there's such a polarized country right now, and it's hard to listen to other sides. How do we bring people together, opening up to anybody?
I struggle with this all the time. I really, really do, because I'll be honest. I don't mind being honest and transparent. There are a lot of days right now where, for those that decide to disregard the humanity of others, I don't care what happens to them. I really, really don't. And it's hard for me to say that because I'm someone that wants to focus on the humanity of everyone, but it's almost a, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me. Like, I'm not falling for it again. So as much as I believe in storytelling, as much as I believe in that being a vessel by which we get to see who people are, I don't know. I feel like I've seen enough of people reveal themselves to say, I don't want to deal with that. And man, it's almost taking me back to, time after the Civil War, Reconstruction, the only time in the United States history where blacks were separate but equal. And I'm not saying necessarily divided along racial lines. I'm just those who get it and those who don't, separate but equal. Those who don't, do what you gotta do, and we'll see you on the other side. So it's a real struggle for me. It's one that I don't really have an answer for. It definitely ebbs and flows with my emotions a lot of time, and I admit watching cable news all the time does not help. But I think I also have those moments where I remind myself, again, just like the book talks about, second, third, fourth, 45th, 46th, 80th chances. We can't give up on humanity, because then we give up on ourselves. We got one shot at this. It's a book about faith. It's a book about spirituality. We got one shot at this, and we got to make the most of it. And how hypocritical would it be to want that for ourselves but not for others? Now, there's what we can do and what we can't do. We have to be mindful of our abilities, but I think the focus has to be the best version of humanity. That doesn't mean perfect. I think we have to realize that too, but the best version of humanity.
Thank you so much. Anybody else want to jump into that?
Jackie, I got to admit, when David talks, I'm recalling when we sat down and read the book Caste by Isabel Wilkerson. And I know I've referenced that book a couple of times, but I just think it's very relevant here. And one thing that I took away from that is that race is uniquely an American concept, right? Like basically what she references is like people from around the world, particularly in Europe and different parts of in the world, even places that are very diverse. Race isn't something that is like a super like present variable that you acknowledge when you meet someone. Whereas, I've even had friends that live in Europe come to the United States and basically say like, I didn't know I was white till I came here, or I didn't know I was X race until I came here. And I think, if there's one thing that kind of gives me hope is that a lot of, every country in the world has in some way, shape, or form, a disastrous history, right? War, pillaging, just horrible things have happened. But lots of civilizations have progressed over time to sort of level playing fields of the stakeholders in their societies. And I do hold out hope that we can one day get there. But one thing that's really interesting, we actually interviewed a while back this author Gautam Mukunda. He's a Harvard Business School professor, and he brought something to my attention that I thought was really interesting. One of the kind of caveats that we like to give the United States in lieu of all our faults is that, we're just a very young nation. We're just a baby country, and we're still figuring it out. And what he correctly pointed out was that, yeah, but in the sense that, as a formal country, we are, yes, relatively young, but pretty much every other major world power has had a governmental revolution restructuring within the past 100 years, 150 years or so, like much more modernized views of the world, restructuring the way they make laws, restructuring the way they embrace technology to better serve the people, really sitting down and thinking critically of the value of a human life, answering these questions that we're really struggling with today. And in that context, in terms of like just how our government is structured, we are actually a very old and archaic country that is in dire need of some change. And so I say that because as we try and strive, like as David said, for the best in humanity that we can, like it's not, I almost wonder if just like onesie and twosie policy changes are even enough. Like if it's actually like the true overhaul that's required, to modernize the way, our society relates with our government. That's something that I'm kind of like, paying attention to pretty keenly these days.
Thank you for sharing. And for those who have been joining other 99 Pages conversations, that's what's so fun about reading a book every month, is we can tie all these themes and threads together. So yes, highly recommend Cast by Isabel Wilkerson. If you haven't read it yet, race is a social construct. Anybody else want to react to that before we move to our last conversation? Great. I just want to make sure I created space. I also just want to thank Jessica in the chat for saying engaging in this discussion is important and relevant to our society. I couldn't agree more. I hope those listening in, as well as the panelists, that we take these conversations into to the water cooler, though again in a pandemic I know it's harder to connect on these topics. The last thing I wanted to talk about, and again this conversation does continue next week for part 2, is religion. We haven't talked about religion at all. We've talked about criminal justice reform, school to prison pipeline, racism, restorative justice, restorative practices. God is a big part of this book. Now, as an Educator Book Club, you know, separation of church and state, we don't talk about God in schools, but God is a big part of this book. So I'm just curious, Rudy, I want to pass it to you. You mentioned in your intro, being Christian is a huge part of your identity. I just want to open up to you at any reflections on God in this book, the role that he plays, or the importance of religion.
Yeah, I think just to kick this section off, I'll just repeat what I mentioned in my opening comments, just the notion that, you know, faith without works is dead. And so, you know, the approach that I tend to take, and I feel like, you know, Father Boyle as well kind of takes his approach is, you know, pray like it depends on God, but work like it depends on you. And so, you know, really putting that faith into action with the work that he's done through Homeboy Industries. But I think we had a lot of good chat beforehand as well, and we'd love to hear some of that shared out as well.
Yes. I know you grew up in the church. I'm just curious about its role in your life, its role in storytelling, its role in your lens on reading this book. Not a very clear question, but like, you know, role of religion in all this. And
okay, I'll try to be short. So I'll say I am someone who prays that he sees God one day. Taken from the scriptures, you know, in my life is really two things: what they call the greatest commandment, which is to love thy neighbor as thyself, and who God is. God is love. So to me, as long as I have those two things at the core of what I do, I think I'll be okay, and I will see God one day. We make this a lot harder than it needs to be. I think that's been reinforced over and over in this conversation. And what I appreciate about Father Boyle, and what I appreciate about those who truly analyze and interpret the scripture, and not just the Bible, but any sacred text, are those who make it real and give you some idea of how you manifest those teachings. And what I do appreciate about the Christian faith is its simplicity. And for me, as someone who grew up in the church, as someone who became very disheartened by the church at 18 years old and really haven't been a regular church goer since, I followed that basic creed. I am going to be a follower of Christ, not necessarily a follower of Christianity. And I don't care what a person's faith is. I don't care what their religious affiliation is. I don't even care if they don't believe in God. To me, that's irrelevant too. As long as I exude love in everything that I do, which is what I appreciate about Father Boyle, because it's clear to me that he exuded love in everything that he does. He's following Christ as best as anyone could. You are following Christ as best as you can. It's all about love. It's all about compassion. And what I loved about what he said about compassion is seeing people as equal. It's not about taking pity. It's not about, you know, your charity. No. It's you looking at them eye to eye and saying, you are me and I am you. That's compassion. These things are simple. They really are simple, but it's a choice that you have to make. You know, we talk about political office. Here's why I wouldn't last more than one term. We're kicked out of political office. Bump it. I'm gonna keep it real simple for you, you know, and for, you know, my fellow Americans and all that kind of stuff. If you aren't exuding love in everything that you do, whether it's little p policy, big P policy, whether it's your basic behavior, whether it's your large scale behavior, whether it's your micro scale behavior, you're doing something wrong. Point blank, period. So that goes to, you know, whatever my fellow senators, my fellow representatives, my vice president, whatever the case may be. does the work we do ascribe to the virtue of love? Can we say with this policy we are loving our fellow man? If the answer is no, we got to change it.
Amazing. I can't believe it. We're already out of time and nobody can follow that. Like, this book is about love. Each of us, I think, approach our work with the virtue of love. We're going to have to continue this next week. Panelists, thank you so much for your time. Audience as well, thank you for a really active live chat. We will see you next week, same time, Wednesday evening. Just remember, it's never too late to pick it up from the library. It's a book of stories. So you don't, even if you just read one chapter, you get a lot of the heart out of it. So